I remember the exact moment the weight settled on my shoulders, not just as a fleeting sensation, but as something permanent, something that reshaped the very architecture of my life. It was a Tuesday, I think, a gray Boston morning, the kind that promises nothing but more gray. I was standing over the stove, stirring Evelyn's specialized gruel, listening to the shallow, theatrical coughs drifting from our bedroom. I was 39, an English professor at a reputable university, and my world had shrunk to the four walls of our brownstone, defined by a woman's chronic illness. My schedule wasn't dictated by syllabi or office hours anymore, but by medication timings, symptom flare-ups, and the delicate balance of Evelyn's ever-fragile existence. I felt like a ghost, haunting my own life, exhausted to the bone, isolated, and increasingly resentful. But then the guilt would rush in, a cold wave, reminding me of my vows, my love, my duty. She needed me. She said I was the only one who truly understood her suffering. And I believed her, even as a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts I dared not acknowledge. We met at a university lecture, of all places. I was a junior professor, she a visiting artist, auditing a course on postmodern literature, claiming it fueled her creative process. She was vibrant, a storm of energy and theatricality. Her eyes, a striking emerald green, seemed to hold a dozen untold stories, and her laugh, a bright, cascading sound, made my usually quiet world feel technicolor. I, a man of books and measured words, was instantly captivated. She pulled me out of my shell, made me see the world through a more passionate, dramatic lens. She spoke of her childhood, an artistic spirit stifled by mundane expectations, her sensitivity almost a burden. I, with my deep well of empathy, felt an instant connection, a need to protect that delicate fire within her. Looking back, there were threads, fine as spider silk, that should have caught my attention. Her stories were always a little grander, her emotions a little more heightened than necessary. A minor inconvenience could become a full-blown existential crisis. A forgotten anniversary was not just a slip, but proof of my deep-seated neglect. She thrived on drama, on being the center of emotional gravity. I remember one time, early on, she recounted a minor car accident she'd witnessed, a fender bender, but her description was so vivid, so laden with trauma, she convinced me she'd been in a serious crash herself. I held her, soothing her, marveling at her sensitivity. I chalked it up to her artistic temperament, her capacity for feeling things so intensely. I wanted to be the steady anchor to her tempestuous soul. I saw a fragility in her that my nurturing heart yearned to mend. I was her rock, her confidant, her savior. Or so I thought. The first symptoms arrived subtly, a gradual darkening of our vibrant life. First, it was fatigue, then unexplained pains, then a host of seemingly disparate ailments, migraines, digestive issues, joint pain, neurological oddities. We embarked on the medical odyssey that would define the next 7 years. Doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist. Countless tests, scans, blood work. Every single one came back inconclusive or showed minor, non-debilitating anomalies. Yet, Evelyn's condition worsened. She became housebound, then often bedbound. Her skin grew pale, her movements slowed, her voice softened to a whisper of perpetual suffering. My career, once a source of quiet pride, became secondary. I canceled lectures, missed conferences, turned down a prestigious research grant. My colleagues, once full of advice and sympathy, gradually stopped calling. My friends faded away, tired, I suppose, of the endless medical updates and the constant cancellations. I was alone, trapped in a house that felt less like a home and more like a high-security prison for two. The psychological pressure was immense. Every conversation revolved around her symptoms, her pain, her despair. My own feelings, my exhaustion, my growing resentment, were swallowed whole, deemed trivial in the face of her profound suffering. If I ever tried to gently suggest a less conventional treatment or express a glimmer of hope, she would collapse, claiming I didn't believe her, that I thought she was making it up. The guilt would flood me, instant and overwhelming. I became her nurse, her therapist, her only contact with the outside world. I learned to monitor her breathing, to recognize the subtle shifts in her pain levels, to interpret the nuanced language of her suffering. Or so I believed. There were moments, fleeting flickers, when I noticed something odd. A sudden burst of energy when she thought I wasn't looking, a strangely rapid recovery after a particularly dramatic crisis, especially if it coincided with a day I'd planned to spend on my own work or with an old friend. I'd push these thoughts away, shaming myself. How could I even think such a thing? She was suffering, and I was her husband. Then came the crisis that felt less like a medical event and more like a carefully orchestrated performance. It was a Saturday, a rare sunny day. I had tentatively suggested we sit on the porch for a few minutes, just to feel the sun on our faces. She had agreed, a weak smile on her face. But as I helped her slowly to her feet, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into my arms, convulsing, her body shaking violently. I called 911, my heart hammering against my ribs. The paramedics arrived, their faces grim, but by the time we reached the hospital, the convulsions had stopped. Her vitals were stable. After hours of observation, the doctors found nothing. Again, Evelyn, weak but lucid, whispered to me how terrifying it had been, how she thought she was dying. I held her hand, my own shaking. But later, driving home, I couldn't shake the image of her eyes, just before they rolled back. They had seemed alert, focused almost, a stage whisper in my gut. A few days later, clearing out a dusty old box of college memorabilia from the back of her closet, I found it. An old acting school portfolio. I remembered she'd briefly attended a summer program before we met. I pulled it out, a forgotten relic. Inside, among old headshots and monologue scripts, I found a section marked Method Acting Techniques. My blood ran cold as I flipped through it. Exercises for simulating physical distress, emotional recall for intense grief, feigning respiratory distress with controlled hyperventilation. There were even notes on specific muscle contractions to mimic convulsions and diagrams on how to achieve a deathly pallor with stage makeup or create superficial skin lesions for a self-harm illusion. The pages, once a curiosity, now felt like a map to a terrifying labyrinth. My hands trembled. This wasn't just a portfolio, it felt like a blueprint. The cold dread that began to seep into my bones was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream. It was the kind that freezes you, makes your mouth dry, and your heart pound a slow, heavy rhythm against your ribs. The voice in my head, the one I'd suppressed for years, roared to life. This wasn't just doubt anymore. This was a gnawing, visceral certainty that something was profoundly wrong. I felt dirty, despicable, for even considering what the portfolio implied. But the thought, once birthed, couldn't be unborn. What if? What if my entire world, my love, my sacrifices, were built on a lie? The sheer audacity of it, the cruelty, made my stomach churn. I had to know. I had to. The idea of invading her privacy, of betraying her trust, was abhorrent to the core of my being. But the alternative, continuing to live a lie, to bleed myself dry for a fabricated illness, was an even greater betrayal of myself. Driven by a desperate, sickening need for clarity, I started to investigate. Discreetly. My first step was an online search for the names of some of the support groups Evelyn claimed to attend online, a virtual community of fellow sufferers. I found nothing, not a trace. Then, I bought two tiny, discreet cameras, marketed as pet monitors, and installed them in the living room and hallway. My hands shook as I affixed them, my conscience screaming at me, but my resolve hardened by the icy certainty that I was on the precipice of something terrible. I also found her old and used laptop tucked away in a drawer. She rarely used it, preferring her tablet for gentle browsing. I remembered her telling me once it was too slow for her, too frustrating. But I found it logged into several social media accounts I didn't recognize, accounts she never mentioned. I started tracking her activity, logging into them late at night after she was supposedly asleep, monitoring her digital footprint. What I found was a slow-motion car crash of my reality. A horror movie playing out on my laptop screen, frame by agonizing frame. The camera footage was the first to break me. I saw Evelyn, pale and frail, struggling to get to the bathroom after I'd left for a quick grocery run. But once she thought she was alone, truly alone, she'd stand up straight, stretch, even hum a little tune. I watched her pull out a small makeup kit, not to beautify herself, but to meticulously apply a grayish pallor to her skin, darken the circles under her eyes, and even. I swallowed, my throat raw. Create faint, superficial scratches on her arm with a pin, pressing just hard enough to leave a red mark, but not break the skin deeply. Then she'd collapse back onto the sofa, waiting for my return, her performance resuming the moment she heard my key in the lock. My stomach turned. I saw clips of her, moments after I'd left for work, performing a vigorous, seemingly pain-free yoga routine in the living room. Other times, I saw her on her phone, laughing, a genuine, unburdened laugh I hadn't heard in years, as she chatted with someone about a movie she'd seen last night. A movie she'd told me she was too ill to watch, that she'd spent the evening in excruciating pain. Then there was her online life. Her secret Facebook profile, bursting with photos of her hiking in the Blue Hills with friends, attending art classes, even performing at open mic nights, poetry readings, not just suffering. She was vibrant, healthy, radiating an almost aggressive joy. Her posts spoke of her adventurous spirit, her love for life, her gratitude for her amazing friends, and fulfilling passions. Not a single mention of chronic illness. Not a single hint of the suffering she inflicted on me daily. The juxtaposition was gut-wrenching. I watched a video she'd uploaded, dancing at a local festival, her green eyes sparkling, her hair flowing. My Evelyn, my sick, bedridden Evelyn, was gone, replaced by a stranger. The ultimate betrayal came in a series of saved messages. I saw her talking to another woman, detailing a specific symptom flare-up she was planning to stage. Thomas has a big lecture on Friday, she'd written. I think a severe migraine, possibly with temporary blindness, would ensure he cancels and stays home with me. My heart froze. This wasn't just faking it. This was weaponized performance. It was premeditated, strategic abuse. And her friend, someone she'd told me was a fellow support group member, simply replied, "You always know how to keep him on his toes. Gotta keep him devoted." My world didn't just crumble. It disintegrated into a fine, acrid dust. The Thomas the first knew, the caring, empathetic husband, shattered into 1,000 pieces. I sat there, hunched over my laptop, the cold metal burning my thighs, feeling a profound nausea rise from the depths of my being. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. My mouth was bone dry, tasting of ash. Years of my life, my love, my sacrifices, reduced to nothing but a stage prop in her cruel, elaborate play. I felt hollowed out, utterly spent. The anger was a slow burn, but beneath it, a deeper, colder grief for the man I used to be, for the life I had lost. For the Evelyn I thought I knew. She hadn't just faked an illness, she had faked a person. She had faked our entire relationship. Every touch, every whispered word of love, every tear I'd shed for her was all a performance. The immense weight I'd carried for so long wasn't born of love or duty, but of a monstrous, calculated deception. I wasn't a loving husband. I was a mark. I spent the next few days in a fog, moving through the motions, serving her special diet, listening to her complaints, nodding numbly. I felt like a puppet, my strings being pulled by an invisible, malevolent hand. But something had shifted inside me. The numbness wasn't despair. It was the quiet, chilling clarity of someone who has stared into an abyss and found something even darker staring back. The rage was there, a dull throb beneath my temples, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct for the shattered remnants of my own life. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not, would not, live another day under the shadow of her lies. This was my breaking point. The charade was over. The confrontation didn't happen with shouts or accusations. It happened with a quiet, devastating finality. I waited until Evelyn was in one of her good phases, sitting up in bed, reading a magazine, a faint, almost healthy blush on her cheeks that she attributed to a good day in her illness cycle. I walked into the bedroom, my heart a dull drum against my ribs, carrying my laptop. She looked up, a small, weary smile on her face. "Thomas, darling, how are you?" I didn't answer. I simply sat at the foot of the bed, opened the laptop, and turned the screen towards her. On the screen was a video, compiled from days of hidden camera footage. It started with her performing her meticulous self-harm illusion, the careful scratching, the application of makeup. Then it transitioned to a clip of her vigorously dancing in the living room, moments after a debilitating flare-up had sent me into a panic. Then came the online messages, her planning her next crisis to control my schedule. And finally, the video of her at the festival, laughing, vibrant, utterly healthy. Her face, initially bewildered, then curious, slowly drained of color. Her eyes widened, darting between the screen and my face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She tried to reach for the laptop, but I gently pulled it back. "Evelyn," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it felt like thunder in the room. "What is this?" She finally found her voice, a small, trembling thing. "Thomas, what? What are you doing? This isn't. I don't understand. This must be some kind of deep fake, some trick. Someone is trying to hurt us." Her eyes, those emerald eyes, filled with tears, her lower lip trembling. The performance. Always the performance. "No," I said, my gaze steady, unwavering. "It's not a trick, Evelyn. It's you. All of it. The past 7 years. Every cough, every collapse, every crisis. It was all you." Her carefully constructed world began to crumble. She tried again, a frantic scramble for control. "How could you? How could you spy on me? You think I'm lying? You think I would fake something so cruel? My own husband, my supposed protector. This is a violation, Thomas. You're sick, not me. You're imagining things." The gaslighting, the familiar tactic, but this time, it was a desperate, flailing attempt. I simply played another clip, a recording from my phone, of her whispering to her friend about her devotion tactics. The sound of her real, healthy voice, cold and calculating, filled the room. That's when her carefully constructed facade shattered completely. The tears escalated into a raw, ugly sob. "You don't understand," she wailed, clutching her chest, her breathing becoming erratic. "You never understood. I needed you, Thomas. I needed to know you would always be there. Everyone always leaves me. My parents, my friends, they always abandon me. I was terrified. Terrified you would leave me too. I needed to be important. I needed to be seen, to be cared for. I just wanted your love." Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo, a torrent of self-pity and blame, not an ounce of remorse. It wasn't an apology, it was a desperate justification, a demand for continued sympathy. I just watched her, the last vestiges of my love and pity evaporating like mist in the harsh light of dawn. Her words, intended to draw me back in, only solidified my resolve. I saw her then, not as my sick wife, but as a manipulator, a betrayer, a woman so consumed by her own needs that she was willing to destroy another human being's life to satisfy them. "I'm leaving, Evelyn," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm divorcing you. I can't do this anymore. You stole my life. You stole us." I stood up, the laptop still open in my hand, the damning evidence still glowing on the screen. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the raw, biting Boston air, feeling the first, shaky tremors of freedom. The aftermath was brutal. The divorce was messy, protracted. Evelyn, true to form, tried to portray herself as the victim, a fragile, abandoned woman, too ill to cope. But the evidence I presented, meticulously compiled and undeniable, spoke for itself. My lawyer was masterful. I sought and obtained a restraining order. The thought of her presence, her lies, now a visceral terror. The legal battles were draining, financially and emotionally, but with each step, I felt a layer of the suffocating weight lift. The emotional collapse came later, once the immediate threat was removed. I found myself in therapy, a place I never imagined I'd need. I spent months dissecting the profound betrayal, the gaslighting, the emotional abuse. I grieved the life I thought I had, the years I lost, the man I nearly became, a hollowed-out shell. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, days I felt so raw and exposed. The world seemed too bright, too loud. I questioned everything, every interaction, every perceived kindness. My trust, once a boundless well, was now a barren wasteland. My therapist, Dr. Hayes, was patient, guiding me through the labyrinth of my trauma, helping me understand the insidious nature of the manipulation I'd endured. "She didn't just lie about her illness, Thomas," he'd said gently. "She used your empathy against you. She turned your best quality into a weapon." That truth resonated deep within me. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. I started with small steps. Reconnecting with old colleagues, tentatively reaching out to friends I'd pushed away. Most were understanding, though a few had moved on. I started teaching again, pouring myself into literature, finding solace and meaning in the stories of others. The classroom, once a distant memory, became a sanctuary. I found joy in the mundane again. The crisp autumn air on my face, the smell of old books, the quiet hum of the university library. Evelyn, stripped of her manufactured sympathy and her primary target, faced a harsh reality of her own making. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she tried to reinvent herself, but her history of deceit had caught up to her. Her art collective dismissed her, her friends distanced themselves. She was alone, left with the wreckage of her own cruel design. I found no satisfaction in this, only a weary sadness. My life is still scarred, yes. The trust isn't fully rebuilt, and a part of me remains guarded. But the bitterness has faded, replaced by a quiet strength. I learned to distinguish genuine empathy from manipulative pity. I learned to trust my instincts, that small, persistent voice I had silenced for so long. I learned that kindness, without boundaries, can be a dangerous thing. Now, almost 2 years later, I sit here, in my reclaimed brownstone. The sun is streaming through the window, bright and hopeful. I'm preparing a lecture on the nature of truth in fiction, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel a genuine excitement for the day ahead. My life is mine again. It's not the life I had planned, but it is real. And for that, I am profoundly, quietly grateful. I am no longer a ghost haunting my own life. I am Thomas, an English professor, a survivor, a man learning to live and truly feel again.